Hello. Welcome back to Scriptural Analysis, the Law of the Covenant series. This is Video 4, Transition B, the pathway between covenants. The purpose of this video will be to analyze how Jehovah administered the pathway for the continuation of the Law of the Covenant, as the posterity of Abraham began to increase in number, and explain the question we left off at in the prior video. Let's begin. Notice Joseph uses the word father in both verse 8 and verse 9. Obviously, in verse 9, Joseph is referring to his biological earthly father when he says, "Go up to my father and say unto him." And this is easy to understand. But what about verse 8, where Joseph says, "He hath been made a father to Pharaoh"? How is Joseph a father to Pharaoh? Again, this will be a question answered in greater detail in the summary videos of the Video 4 series. But to briefly define it now, this is what is known as covenant language. The position of Pharaoh represents the supreme emperor-king. And in covenant language, this can also be termed suzerain. Joseph, on the other hand, has proven to be Pharaoh's supremely loyal servant or vassal. In the Near Far East patriarchal model of governance, when a servant or vassal proves such loyalty to an emperor or king, the emperor-king can form a covenant of grant in which the relationship between the two now elevates to the term father and son, instead of suzerain and vassal. Pharaoh knew that God was with Joseph, and therefore commanded his people to view Joseph as their father. Thus the phrase, "God hath made me a father to Pharaoh," is immediately explained by Joseph being a lord of all Pharaoh's house, and a ruler throughout the land of Egypt. By placing Joseph as governor of Egypt, Pharaoh was informing his citizenry that Joseph, through his loyalty, has become a covenanted son to Pharaoh. And as such, Pharaoh, who is Joseph's father in the covenant of grant, has made Joseph a father over the citizenry, and the citizens are to follow Joseph's loyalty example to Pharaoh, and as such, become loyal vassals to Joseph, or Joseph's covenanted sons and daughters. And so the statement, "God hath made me a father to Pharaoh," means Joseph has become ruler to all the Egyptians, and they are to loyally obey all things Joseph commands, whether these commands come directly from Joseph, as he acts in accordance to his father Pharaoh's overall plan, or as Pharaoh directly commands Joseph to command the people. Either way, Joseph fulfills his covenant trust with Pharaoh, and the people fulfill their covenant obligations to Joseph. This system ensures the governance necessary to achieve the successful implementation of the desired commands. Sound familiar? It will. And we will discuss this governance structure more in the summary section of the Video 4 series. But for now, let's get back to our covenant pathway. Joseph, because of God's governance, is in a position to provide life continuation to the tribes of Israel, and not only that, but with Pharaoh's blessing, also sets them up in a type of promised land, in a place called Goshen. It is here in Goshen that Joseph's family comes back together and is saved. Jehovah ensures this act by directly placing Joseph in a position of authority, long before the danger of the famine is known to anyone. And this pattern of knowing what is to come, long before it arrives, is repeated over and over again within these writings, and is a sign that the authors use to remind the reader the importance of divine protection that is administered by Jehovah for all those who choose to find and enter into the covenant terms Jehovah has directed to be followed to receive the Abrahamic covenant blessings of P cubed plus 1. Joseph's loyalty earned him an opportunity to know what was to transpire with his posterity in future governance events. Now, although Goshen represents a promised land at this time, because it becomes a gathering place for those seeking the covenant, thus protecting and preserving the lineage of Abraham from the destroyer, which is in this case the famine, the reader must remember that it is not the land where Jehovah promised Abraham an inheritance. However, Jacob and his reunited family, so grateful for the miraculous events that have brought them all together, accept the hospitality of Pharaoh, and as strangers in the land, begin to lay down roots in Goshen, even though Jacob knows very well the prophecy given to Abraham from Jehovah, which states, "Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years," as found in Genesis 15, verse 13. Would Goshen be this land? Unfortunately, yes it would. But more on that later. First, let's understand why this history of Joseph is an end-time allegory. Simply put, Joseph has 2 sons born to him during his time in Egypt, where Joseph had married a Shemite princess, meaning a woman who descended from the lineage of Shem, whose name was Asenath. This is important because the covenant could continue through these sons. These sons were given the names Manasseh and Ephraim. Prior to Joseph's father Jacob dying, Jacob, having received God's gift of the priesthood from his fathers, who received it from Melchizedek, blessed these boys and placed the fullness of the Gentiles upon Ephraim, giving him the birthright blessing of the covenant for all Israel, where it would remain for all time. The term Israel used here does not mean a country called Israel, but alludes to those who at any time in the earthly timeline of human existence, from that point on, that would find and accept the terms of the law of the covenant and its administrator, Jehovah, until all things on the earth had come to an end under Jehovah's command. So, Israel, being a metaphor for all people who have found and accepted these terms, will represent a large number of individuals when that time arrives. In end times, Ephraim's lineage would play the role of Joseph of old, separated from the other tribes of Israel for a long time, but being placed in a position to provide them life in the restored ancient covenant, as well as another protected promised land, when these lost tribes eventually come to Ephraim as a nation, which is just prior to the author's prophesied millennium timeline, where the Lord will come to reign by removing the systems of Babylon from off the earth and installing those of God the Father. So, just as Joseph saved the tribes of covenant Israel in his day, allowing the Abrahamic covenant to continue to be fulfilled, as per Jehovah's promise, the end-time lineage of Ephraim will do exactly that by preparing a way for the covenant-seeking tribes of Israel to obtain that which is needed for eternal life and for withstanding the duties of the future millennium order under Jehovah's reign. Remember that the Abrahamic covenant was to be taken to all the earth when the 12 tribes were dispersed from the promised land in some future stage, for not living the terms required. It would be at this time that the law of the covenant would be lost on the earth for a long time, but would eventually be restored. And in the land of that restoration, descendants of Ephraim would lead the way in providing this fullness to the Gentiles, and someday to the other tribes of Israel that come seeking this eternal life-giving covenant restored and preserved through Ephraim. This is indeed another incredible literary work by the authors, which has stood the test of time and seeks to enlighten us by teaching the importance of Jehovah's long-standing governance to fulfill the promises of P cubed plus 1 among those who live the terms Jehovah prescribes. Joseph's father Jacob, or Israel, as called of by Jehovah, nears death, and he reiterates with his posterity the importance of the land Jehovah had promised Abraham as an inheritance by instructing Joseph to bury him in the land of his fathers. And at Jacob's death, Joseph complies. Eventually, Joseph too would die, as would all his siblings, and their posterity would continue to dwell in the land of Goshen, growing continually in numbers. Unfortunately, this posterity would live to fulfill the prophecy given from Jehovah to Abraham, and would be the 400-year slaves to Egypt's Pharaoh, whose succession would eventually return to a descendant of Ham. And this Pharaoh, who did not know Joseph, would issue the edict that would see every Hebrew male child born killed by being cast into the river. It was time for Jehovah to act again to fulfill the covenant promise to protect the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so, needing another loyal servant who could grow to raise himself to a level where he could earn the right to see God while in the flesh and participate directly with God in his governance, a special child was born. A child who would become the pathway for the continuation of the Abrahamic covenant by having Jehovah administer another covenant for a new people willing to choose to follow the terms of this conditional law of the covenant. The baby would be named Moses, and the new covenant would be called the Sinai covenant, because it would be given to Moses on Mount Sinai in the not-too-distant future. And that brings us to the beginning of Series 4, the Sinai Covenant, a video series that will bring you closer to understanding the author's incredible literary description of the governance of God. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to you joining me for Video 4, Part 1, where the author's message regarding the continuation of Jehovah's governance as he administers the law of the covenant adds another layer of responsibility upon those people who would seek to be called God's chosen ones. Until next time, take care and contemplate these things.